Well, welcome everyone. My name is Nadia Hutchinson. I'm with WEAC for Environmental Justice. I am our Government Affairs Manager. I'm really excited to kick off this call, Justice Forward, utilizing public-private partnerships to create change. How can we reduce lead poisoning through the Justice40 initiative? So to start us off, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this conversation to share it on our YouTube channel so that people who are not able to make it can join and watch later. For some Zoom norms, our chat is currently disabled, but we do have a Q&A feature. So if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the Q&A. Just because we have a jam-packed next hour, we're going to hold all the Q&A until the very end of the conversation. So as you all know, we're here today to talk about lead poisoning and how we can use the Justice40 initiative to help decrease lead. So to start, what is the Justice40 initiative? The Justice40 initiative is a executive order created by President Biden, Executive Order 14008, that really directs 40% of benefits from federal investments for climate, clean energy, and much more to go to disadvantaged communities. And as part of that Justice40 initiative, lead service lines has been identified as one of those programs that qualifies for robust funding to go directly to disadvantaged communities. So we're here today to really talk and dialogue on what are the gaps, what is still needed. Even though there is a lot of money currently for lead service line replacement through the bipartisan infrastructure law, is it enough? Do we have all the resources in place in our communities for lead service line replacement to happen? And if not, what is still needed? Today, you'll learn that from our esteemed panelists who I'm very excited to introduce. We're going to start with one of a dear colleague of mine, Stephanie Simeon. She is the executive director at the Heart of City Neighborhoods, Inc. Originally from Brooklyn, Stephanie achieved her master's in urban planning in 2005 from the University at Buffalo. This led her to take on leadership role at executive director of Heart of the City Neighborhood in 2007. Through her leadership, Heart of the City Neighborhoods' ambitious approach to fighting blight and property abandonment in Buffalo has made a real difference in improving whole neighborhoods. Her guidance has expanded Heart of the City Neighborhoods' work into Buffalo's East Side community as project manager and co-developer. These partnerships have given community groups the opportunity to strengthen the trust between residents and prospective developers by providing a platform for the community to have their voices heard, views considered, needs acknowledged. When Stephanie's not advocating for disadvantaged communities facing housing insecurity, she and her family enjoy being outdoors, yoga, and music. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Stephanie, and I kick it over to you.
Thanks so much, Nadia. That was such a fantastic kickoff. I need to have you more on any other events like this. But I am so excited that I get the opportunity to share Buffalo's story. But first, I want to thank WEAC for Environmental Justice and all the partnerships that they have brought to this great city. It is really amazing to be able to work with them and to bring such a challenging issue like the lead in our water lines into a much larger audience. So I want to thank you for that and inviting me for today's panel. So as she said, my name is Stephanie Simeon. I'm the executive director of Heart of the City Neighborhoods, and I get to play the lead role as a community-based organization addressing this issue of the lead water lines. Buffalo is a very unique city. I've been able to call it home since 1998. One of the things that makes us very unique is that we have some of the oldest housing market in the United States. The average age that homes were built in our area was 1841. And so we have a significantly old housing stock. And unfortunately, we have The old housing stock, where we have some of our greatest points of access for lead. Um, we have areas that have experienced significant disinvestment, where there had to be a large amount of demolition of distressed properties that expose other vulnerable populations to more lead exposures through the dust that is getting in through the windows and the doors. So now that we're also looking at other access points for the lead, not only through the built environment, but through the soil and the water. Um, it is estimated that we have about 40,000 lead lines in the city of Buffalo, and we're hoping to replace major intersections um, through this initiative. Some of the goals that we have with Buffalo is that under my support, I've been able to bring on groups like Open Buffalo and Citizens Action to collaborate with the Buffalo Sewer Authority to address the lead in the water. Um, the lead line replacement project is about two to $300,000 to do that. And again, as I said, we have about 40,000 lines that need to be replaced. One of the other goals that we're trying to do is identify and replace the lead service lines at little to no cost to the home buyer. We want to be able to educate the community on the adverse health effects of lead. Again, because we have such old housing stock, Buffalo seems to be more aware of the lead issue as it relates to the built environment, but not as much as it relates to the water and the soil. And we also want to be able to look at building a workforce training component to train folks in the community to replace the lead lines. One of the challenges that we are facing, and I'm looking forward to talking with my other colleagues along this panel today, is dealing with the bureaucracy and partnerships with the city government. And then also ensuring the residents understand the harmful impacts of having lead in the water without creating this sort of the sky is falling public health nightmare without having the appropriate resources and filters and such in place for our residents. For those of you who are not familiar with Buffalo, do know that unfortunately on May 14th, our community was victims of a racialized trauma that caused the death of 10 individuals. And so we have had experience over the last 20 to 30 years of being an area that has been significantly disinvested in. And to have a massacre at that scale happen right after that, and then have it where it's a difficult community to live in anyway, and now have this other issue of us being in very old housing stock with these issues of the lead lines. It really, really has impacted us in ways that I'm just still processing and unable to imagine. So we're hoping to employ a three-pronged strategy in Buffalo, which is to deal with, to break up this issue in a people, place, and policy issue. And that's why I've been able to bring on Open Buffalo and Citizens Action to help us with the policy pieces. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is to work with the city of Buffalo to identify the geography, so an area that we can begin in. The east side is half of the city, and that happens to be the most predominantly African American populated area. So we want to hit those areas first and be able to provide um, a product that can be mirrored throughout the city and then eventually throughout the county. There is a current program called Build Bailey Back that involves the sewer authority. It's building a project on the east side of Buffalo. And in this effort, it will be hoping to improve the sewer lines, the sidewalks, the streets, the bikeability. And so we're hoping to use that, since that's an already funded initiative, to kick off getting the lead out in Buffalo. We want to be able to provide education and educate the residents on how to connect around the issues of environmental challenges, especially lead. We want to be able to help shape the narrative on who finds the narrative around public health issues. And then we want to make sure that right now there's a lot of environmental advocacy done at the state level, but we need to be able to bring that to the community level. And we also want to amplify lead as a racial justice issue. So that's a little bit about Buffalo, a little bit about how we're hoping to address this issue of getting the lead out. And I will kick it over to my other colleague.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that overview. It is so amazing to hear about the work that you are currently doing in Buffalo. I know that you've had quite some challenges, and your perseverance is not remiss on me. Just to highlight, Buffalo has had a rough year with both tragic disasters, but also climate. You had a very intense storm pretty recently, and Stephanie was trying to call us in as we planned in the dark. So I want to honor and say thank you for your relentless effort to help decrease lead poisoning in Buffalo. And I want to introduce our next panelist, Jessica Dandridge, Executive Director of the Water Collaborative. As the Executive Director of the Water Collaborative of Greater New Orleans, Jessica Dandridge has dedicated her life to community advocacy and campaign development for organizations seeking to be socially, economically, and culturally inclusive. As the Executive Director of the Water Collaborative, she focuses on community-led adaptation and mitigation as the core to water justice and climate resiliency strategies. To be resilient, Jessica believes communities need redundant, rapidly distributed resources. To achieve this, Jessica has led a movement around water management as a tool for social and economic liberation that should be transformational to our most vulnerable communities. Today, the Water Collaborative focuses on water management, hazard mitigation, water justice through access, affordability, and quality, the equitable community transformation through blue/green jobs, and the renewable economy. Jessica's accolades and accomplishments are so long, so I'm going to cut it there. But I'm really excited to introduce Jessica next. Thank you, and take it away.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And hello, everyone from the Deep South here in New Orleans. It's a beautiful day, so I'm happy to be here. New Orleans is known for many things. It's known for its history, its culture. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina are things that people think of, but oftentimes they don't think of lead. With that being said, New Orleans is tracking higher lead pollutants than most places in the country. In fact, a recent study from 2015 showed that we had 3 times higher lead amounts than Flint, Michigan. But that's not the story that's been told to residents, and nor is that the story being told on the national audiences. New Orleans is a beautiful city that was built in 17, or at least founded in 1718, over 300 years old, with many historic neighborhoods. In fact, Treme being one of the neighborhoods that I'm in right now, was and is the oldest Black neighborhood founded by Black women. And so with that being said, there are a lot of histories here that connect us to poor and old infrastructure. Our sewage system and our water system is controlled by Sewer Ridge and Water Board, and they control pipes that are 36 inches and up. But we have a very complicated system because that's what happens when you have an old system. And we also have the Department of Public Works, which controls pipes that are 36 inches and under. With that being said, there are over 70,000 lines, water lines, that are controlled by the city of New Orleans that have never properly been cataloged. In fact, a recent study showed in 2017 that lead lines not only were not improperly cataloged, we actually don't know how many lead lines the city of New Orleans has, which is extraordinarily problematic and dangerous. But furthermore, there's a lot of mistrust with our water system and our infrastructure and our utilities around not just overall water systems, but especially around lead. In 2017, they found that the Inspector General of New Orleans found that they hid lead studies by the Sewage and Water Board because of a high amount of lead in our water systems. So we have a lot of challenges here. We are a city that is threatened by climate change on a regular basis, whether it be tropical storms and hurricanes. We are still rebuilding from Hurricane Katrina. That process is a long, arduous, painful process, and people are still dealing with their collective trauma along those lines. And then on top of that, now trying to upgrade our infrastructure system. Today, not only do we have a lack of understanding of how many lead lines we have multiple agencies that aren't talking to one another. Finally, we also started a recent project where $2.5 billion of investment is going into upgrading the infrastructure system, which is a great idea in theory, but that means that they're shaking and moving old lines from over 200 plus years ago that most definitely have lead in it. So there are concerns around the current infrastructure and what it actually means. The last thing I'll add is that the utility knows all of this information. They know that they have really old lines, that they have lead in the lines, but they're not actually creating communication with residents about the dangers of lead and that there could actually be lead in the line. In fact, they give a different spin, which is we think our water is clean and it's perfectly fine. So as an organization, we are very excited to be working on this. This is a very important issue that many, many people need to know about here in New Orleans and really across Southeast Louisiana. And we're hoping to be an example for the rest of the region about how to tackle this issue. New Orleans was allocated over $52 million for lead service line replacement. And so we are very excited to be working with Total Community Action, who I think is on the line right now. They are a longtime partners here in New Orleans and working on a variety of issues with our most vulnerable populations. We also were working with Civic Co-op, which is a cooperative of organizers and creators and thought leaders to create one educational campaign to really better understand the lead service line map and how many lines we actually have, and finally create a solution for these problems. That's a really big, has a lot to do in a very short amount of time, but we're really going to try because honestly, no one's ever tackled lead line in New Orleans. We have so many things and so many compounding problems, poverty, crime, again, climate change. There's so many things going on here, but we have to also talk about our water systems and the water we are consuming because it changes and really affects every aspect of our lives. So moving forward, that's where we're going to be going as partners. And I will add one more thing on there is that we are working with the utility and the city of New Orleans on this process. And we're excited to be partners with WEACT and NRDC and Blue Conduit because they're actually helping us create a conversation that would have not happened prior to this project. So public-private partnerships is key to actually have this conversation. If we were outsiders trying to do this work and trying to move it on our own, we would have been stonewalled. And we're still having to deal with some of those problems and create new systems and policies and processes to actually get that money implemented and moved in an equitable way. But we know at least we are starting from at least the right spot, but there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of trust building to have to happen and a lot to do research on. So, but we're very, very excited to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's so many things going on in New Orleans. Yeah, I will kick it back to my colleague and thank you everyone for having me again.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. It's so interesting to learn about New Orleans. As you said, I didn't know that New Orleans had such a severe lead poisoning issue. So definitely something that's underrepresented in the media. And so this advocacy is so crucial for various reasons. I'm really excited to introduce our next panelist. Karen Detmer is the Managing Director for Infrastructure Implementation for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, Office of Water. The Office of Water works to ensure that drinking water is safe, wastewater is safely returned to the environment, and surface waters are properly managed and protected. Prior to joining EPA, Karen served as the Commissioner of Public Works for the city of Milwaukee and as superintendent of Milwaukee Water Works in Wisconsin. In these roles, she has developed and managed large capital projects, and her leadership has been recognized for advancing equity within the workforce and the community. Karen is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Wisconsin, and she holds a BS in architectural engineering and an MS in environmental engineering from Milwaukee School of Engineering. Karen, looking forward to handing it over to you next.
Thank you, Nadia. I really appreciate the invitation to participate here today. And I'm just going to share my screen. I hope that's coming through for you all.
Yes, it is.
Great. And I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for the invitation to participate today. As you mentioned, I come from local government and know how important community engagement is in getting these projects done and getting the general public interested and educated and understanding the issues at large. So really appreciate the interest, and thank you all that are on the line for attending, and thank you to those of you that are watching this in the future. So really appreciate it. As Nadia mentioned in the intro, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, has a significant amount of funding, $50 billion that has been allocated to water infrastructure projects. President Biden signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, into law just over a year ago on November 15th of 2021. So we just had a one-year celebration of how much work we've accomplished, and looking forward to how much work we still have yet to accomplish over the next 4 years of water infrastructure. In the past year, we identified key priorities for our bill implementation in the EPA's Office of Water. And two of those I'm going to focus on today, which is increasing investment in disadvantaged communities, as well as making rapid progress on lead service line replacement. I'll also just note that a couple of the other items have been mentioned here today: climate and One Water innovation, as well as renewing the water workforce. So all of these priorities are so interwoven and so critical in ensuring that we're equitably and responsibly getting the funding out. This is just an overview of the amount of funding. That over $50 billion is primarily allocated through the state revolving funds, which is funding that is provided to states, tribes, and territories through grants from the EPA, and then allocated through project priority lists from the states to communities. And those are either provided by way of a loan, a very low interest loan, or principal forgiveness or grant funding, which partially is mandated under the bill. So when we talk about the Justice 40 requirement of ensuring that at least 40% of benefits in federal investments go towards disadvantaged communities, this is actually mandated by this column of additional subsidy that is mandated to be put out from the states to communities as forgivable loans or grants to those communities. So 49% of the $15 billion allocated for lead service line replacement will be provided to disadvantaged communities as forgivable loans or grants, really exceeding that Justice 40 mandate. These are just some of the eligibilities, and really, wanted to provide this slide with a lot of information so that people could come back and reference it. But really want to talk about the project milestones that communities go through in order to complete a lead service line replacement and get that community lead free. So the first step is really to develop that lead service line inventory. Jessica talked about this at length. It's so key to find out where the lead service lines are so that the community can put together a plan, submit their funding application to take advantage of that funding that's part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law dedicated to lead service line replacements. And then, of course, put together that plan, get the funding, and initiate the construction project. So all of those components are fundable under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, as well as the drinking water SRFs. So in addition to the $15 billion that's allocated in the bill for specifically dedicated to lead service line replacement, if communities have utility-owned portions of the lead service lines, those are eligible to be replaced under the general SRF funding. So really a potential of over $15 billion. How can you all get involved? That's why you're here, right? Where is it important for you to get involved? And one of the biggest components of funding to communities is the state's intended use plan. So this is a plan that every state is required to have, and they're also required to publish it for public comment. And it's so important to know, if you are working in a community, what is in that state intended use plan and how you can get engaged in advocating for your water utility, for your water infrastructures projects to be included in that plan. So become aware. On our website, we do have a link to each drinking water, and also on the clean water side, we're talking about drinking water today, but there's a link to each of the state websites where you can find out more information on those programs and locate those intended use plans. The other key component, as has been mentioned, is the state definition of disadvantaged community. Each state is required to have a definition of the disadvantaged community as part of their intended use plan. And that, of course, comes into play in really ensuring that 49% of the funding for the lead service line replacement allocations is going to disadvantaged communities. And these definitions are published. EPA also has put out resources that provides a baseline for the 2021 definitions of disadvantaged communities for each of the states. I've got a link at the end that you can find that resource. And I'm so pleased to note that based on information we have in that report, as well as a March of 2022 bill SRF implementation memo that we put out to states, including information on what a really good definition of a disadvantaged community looks like in order to get that funding out to those communities that need it most. I'm so pleased to note that 22 states have taken that information and they've changed their definition of disadvantaged communities to ensure that they are serving those communities the best. In addition to the eligibilities that I mentioned for some of the community project milestones, the states as well as EPA have set aside opportunities where it's funding that they can keep out of that grant funding from the EPA, and for EPA out of the general allocation to fund administrative costs as well as technical assistance. And this creates such a great opportunity for those communities that may lack in capacity to apply for a funding application or to even know where to get started. So we just announced recently over $150 million of EPA's set aside funding will be going to awards to 29 different environmental finance centers. And those environmental finance centers are tasked with using that funding to search out communities that have not applied for an SRF application, SRF funding before, that are desperately in need of getting funding to complete their water infrastructure projects, including lead service line inventories and replacements, and helping those communities to get the capacity that they need, as well as apply for the funding, develop their projects, and see the projects through construction. Such an exciting opportunity. And we're in the award process right now for those 29 EFCs, but we'll have much more information on our website to ensure that communities can self-prescribe it and self-identify as well, and raise up their hand and say, hey, I would like some help. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity. And the Office of Water, in partnership with our new program Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, has formally requested EPA's NEJAC, the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, to provide us with recommendations on how best to implement technical assistance with an equity focus in mind. Topics that the NEJAC is looking at include community outreach and engagement, community trust building, and ways to really thoughtfully address the unique needs of underserved communities. So we encourage you to learn more about NEJAC and to get involved. The link is on the slide here, and it's such a great space to learn and share your voice. This slide is just a little bit about how communities can get involved, engaging the state SRF program, and how you can help your communities get involved as well. And then I just wanted to leave this here to provide some of those contacts that I referenced, some really good information that is available to you all to go back and reference and make sure that you have all the resources that you may need to understand how EPA's funding is going out. Thank you. Back to you, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your presentation. Super helpful information. I am so excited to hear and learn that cities and localities are already starting to change their definition for disadvantaged communities. That's something that a lot of our organizations and communities have done a lot of advocacy around. So it's really great to see that change. Introducing our next panelist, Joy James. Joy James is a project manager for community partnerships with Blue Conduit. Within this work, Joy works to support Blue Conduit in building resources, initiatives, and products that amplify community conversations about equitable water infrastructure using data as a storytelling tool. Prior to joining Blue Conduit, Joy worked in nonprofits and philanthropy for 5 years, most recently with the Kreisky Foundation Detroit program, deploying millions of dollars to BIPOC-led racial justice and community development organizations. Joy received her BA in forensic science and psychology from Syracuse University and is currently an MBA candidate at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. So looking forward to hearing from you, Joy, and you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you again. Can folks see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Amazing. Hello, everyone. My name is Joy James, and I am a community partnerships project manager with Blue Conduit. Blue Conduit is incredibly honored to be co-creating with organizations like Heart of the City Neighborhoods and New Orleans Water Collaborative to ensure that access to clean and safe drinking water in all communities is achieved. And for those who may not have engaged with us in the past, Blue Conduit is a machine learning software company that works with communities, municipalities, and utility groups to accurately inventory and identify the presence of lead service lines with fewer financial resources spent and minimal disruption of residents. So we'll really be diving into that community project milestone number 1 that Karen just spoke about around inventory mapping. To build on our conversation today, I'd like to share a bit more about how Blue Conduit works with stakeholders to identify lead service lines that support long-term prioritization and accountability for getting the lead out. So for a bit of background, for those who don't know us, Blue Conduit's team began its work in 2016 during the Flint water crisis. During this time, the team was working on this project based out of University of Michigan researchers, and we worked with a number of community organizations, public health officials, and municipal officials over the last 60 years to inventory and map these lead service lines. I can't express how incredibly important that all 3 of these stakeholders, especially community, were a part of this process, because this really helps the city best understand what educational informational needs need to be available, what accountability metrics need to be ensured when developing these inventories and maps. And as we've heard today, unfortunately, most cities do not know where their lead service lines are located, but new EPA rules require all communities to be transparent about what service line materials are. Some of the service lines have been in the ground for more than 100 years, and engaging with residents around potential sources of lead exposure requires a very intentional and community engaged design process that we're lucky to be a part of. So I just want to quickly run through an example of the power of public-private partnerships with our work in Toledo, Ohio, in which the city initially predicted that it would take 30 years to get the lead out, with about 30,000 lead service lines present. And they now predict, with the inventory map and work that we've been able to do, that it will take about 7 years to replace the lead service lines, now that they know where to prioritize these efforts. And outputs of community partnerships identified the need for the city to not only inventory the lead service lines, but really think about and provide targeted education. You'll see here on the screen this public education element around videos and how those are being utilized, as well as ability for public information submission. And along with that, really making sure that there's questions around, what does it look like for me to identify lead service lines in my own home if necessary? Also, as you can see here, through partnering with the community and Blue Conduit, the city was able to not only inventory lead service lines, but further identify where resources need to be steered for long-term. And you'll see a screenshot of what this looks like on the screen, but we will be dropping some links so you can interact with the maps yourselves and better understand this process. I want to end by just saying that the work that we are able to do with NRDC, WEACT, and our community hubs are really incredible, because it's able to support really ensuring that we get the lead out long term and not just identify the problem. I'll say thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be sure to answer them later.
Thank you so much, Joy. It is so amazing to learn about the work of Blue Conduit. I will say I'm a bit of a map nerd. So I always love to see a good color-coded map. And I know how essential it is to know where lead service lines are. I personally live in Baltimore. We're a bit of an older city. We have lead service lines, and we also don't know where all of our lead service lines are. So the work that Blue Conduit is doing is so important. And I will kick it over and introduce our last panelist for today, Carla Palmer. Carla Palmer is a product impact associate at google.org, Google's philanthropy. At google.org, Carla helps manage the team's AI for social good and sustainability portfolios. Before joining Google's social impact and grant-making initiatives, Carla worked as a policy specialist at Google, where she helped shape the company's policies on user protection and privacy. A DMV native, Carla holds an honors BA in political science and certificate of advanced leadership studies from American University. Carla is passionate about connecting underserved communities to critical resources that help them achieve just outcomes and lasting change. Kicking it over to you, Carla.
Thanks, Nadia, for that introduction. You know, as Nadia said, I have the pleasure of working on a lot of different things here on google.org, including our AI work and our sustainability work. But I think, you know, also more specifically have the pleasure of leading our environmental justice work. And I think I'm just so thrilled to see gatherings like these, where we have folks that are coming together, EJ leaders, innovators, technologists, government, so many others that are really working to tackle these issues of environmental injustice. And you know, we know that there's just such immense power in public-private partnerships, particularly public-private partnerships where communities are engaged as really the co-equal, valuable partners that they you know, ultimately are. And these are really the partnerships that we see that are moving the needle. You know, for us at google.org, supporting this work between WEACT, NRDC, and Blue Conduit really is an important step to helping to make the process of identifying and replacing lead pipes not just faster, but also less expensive, and I think really importantly, more data informed. You know, of course, we know the process, as I think folks maybe alluded to a bit earlier, of digging up lead pipes is something that, you know, can often cause communities with quite a bit of disruption. And wherever there's an opportunity to leverage data, ML technology to be able to make that process more accurate and more reliable is a win for communities. So we're more than thrilled to be supporting that work. I think one thing that we've heard consistently from environmental justice groups and communities is really the importance of data in making the case for funding at the federal and state level, but also, as I just mentioned, informing advocacy and mitigation efforts. And really in response to these learnings that we've consistently heard from communities last year, or this year, the year is almost over. This year we launched the Environmental Justice Data Fund, which is a $9 million fund that supports frontline communities in the US to use data to unlock resources and increase their access to Justice 40 benefits and federal infrastructure funding. I think what's really exciting about that fund, about this work, is really the way that we've been able to support projects, everything from sort of the nascent data capacity building that we know organizations that are just beginning their data journeys need support for, to more advanced projects involving sort of predictive analytics and modeling and tool development. And I think really being able to support communities and organizations that sit on that broad range and that broad spectrum, I think is key in both sort of closing the gap where those gaps exist, but I think also being able to sort of double down on opportunities and innovations like the ones that Blue Conduit and WEAC are working on in order to move the needle even faster. So we're excited to have granted out $9 million to nearly 100 organizations across the country this year, and are really hopeful about the type of momentum that this will create for not just the organizations themselves and being able to have this extra capacity, but also for the communities that they work in. So to learn more about this work, you can visit environmentaljusticedatafund.com. But I think really just want to close out in saying that being able to partner with organizations like WEAC for these important conversations where we're able to share resources, technology, solutions, and really come together, I think is incredibly important and excited. I'd like to stop talking because I'd love to leave some time for folks to ask questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Carla, for sharing. I just want to say that it's been so exciting to see Google.org's investment in impacted communities and having data for frontline communities. The White House recently released the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And as environmental justice communities commented on this tool, one of the big concerns of it was that there was not enough data. So having more data is going to be so important as we go through the Justice 40 initiative and beyond. So feel free, we're going to move into our Q&A section. So panelists, feel free to put your cameras on and I will have us all kind of spotlighted. And we already have some questions in the Q&A and I'm going to read them, but also feel free to ask more questions. I see a lot of folks having questions about intended use plans within the EPA. So Karen, it is maybe the hot seat here. But our first question, or the first one that's not been answered yet, was anonymous, and it says, "Thank you for the helpful presentation. Many frontline community groups and other NGOs are spending a lot of time commenting on state intended use plans for lead service lines and other infrastructure. Some states are really considering our comments, but others are basically not, just issuing final plans that are unchanged without explanation. Is EPA insisting that states seriously consider and respond to public comments before approving intended use plans? We have heard different things from different EPA regions about whether that's something EPA will insist upon." So Karen, this question is for you.
Well, thank you. And I can certainly say this is not the first time that this has been called to our attention. I know there is so much interest from communities in what is included in the intended use plan, and it's amazing. And we are thoroughly encouraging that, as you heard here today. So there are a couple of different items, and I'll try to keep it brief because I know we're very short on time. But continue to submit your comments to your states, continue to engage, be persistent. We have seen a variety of different responses. There was another question about California in the chat. And we have seen some movement based on some comments on California's IUP. They have adjusted and made some changes. And I think, there are states that are more used to community engagement than others. And I can tell you it's not always a bumpy road, and that's why, maybe it's always a bumpy road, perhaps, but this is a brand new pot of funding. There has never been a dedicated federal funding source for lead service line replacement, and states are figuring it out. They're trying to determine what can be done in the first year, what they think may be the right thing to do in the first year. And we are closely watching that, engaging with our regions. We have asked our regions and are continuing to ask our regions to engage closely with the states, use those relationships that they have to identify new opportunities where they can better engage with the public, where they can hear some of these comments that are coming back, see what other states have done that has been a really good example of moving forward with lead service line replacements. We have communities and states that have no experience putting together an inventory, and they're not sure where to start. So that's where that technical assistance is really going to come into play. And of course, we're seeing, a huge variety of items in the intended use plans that are really run the spectrum. And we're hearing from some states that they're not really sure where to get started. Not every state has applied for the lead service line replacement funding yet. And they have until about the middle of the year in 2023 to apply for those 2022 funds. So there's still time, and we're working with them. And we want you all to stay engaged and make sure that you are talking to the states, talking to your communities, and also looking for resources from us. I mentioned the disadvantaged community definition report that we have on our website available. There are a variety of other resources that we are looking to put out there. We have a lead service line inventory guidance now that is accompanied by a webinar that will help communities and get prepared and get an understanding of how to get started on putting that inventory together. And of course, getting an understanding that that is an eligible funding program for the bill funding. So a lot of opportunity out there, and we need your help getting the word out too.
Thank you so much, Karen, for answering that question. I am going to just pose a question to all of our panelists. So we're here today across kind of the spectrum of government agencies, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and private organizations. As we kind of work to get the lead out, how can we continue to be working together? So feel free to anyone to unmute and answer.
I was just going to say that knowledge is power. And I think if you can create an opportunity where people can be transparent, I think that's the best way to go. It's been really, really difficult in terms of engagement, but being culturally responsive and making sure that as we're doing engagement, we're not telling, we're telling people all of these issues and then not having some kind of resource in the interim while we're waiting to do some of the heavy lifting of removing the lead lines. So I think one of the things you just need to do is just stay transparent, manage expectations, making sure that you have all your material in multiple ways, multiple access points for people. And in our case, in Buffalo, multiple languages. so that there's nothing left and there's no stone unturned when it comes to making sure that people understand. And then also bridging beyond just your scope of influence. So again, we're a housing agency, but we're working with environmental justice advocates. We're working with racial justice groups. We're working with the municipality. We're working with the education department. We're working with all the folks that will be touching and being impacted by having this lead in their water. So you just have to continue to build that resource and that capacity.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And yeah, Jessica, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Everything that Stephanie said, communication is really important. And I think also really creating systems of accountability. In Louisiana, we are spending billions upon billions of dollars on infrastructure, not just for the recent bipartisan law, but we were doing a lot of work in coastal restoration. And there's been a lot of concerns around accountability. So I just want to double down. And in order to create trust, especially around something like lead service lines, people are concerned about their health, they're concerned about the impacts on their community. They have to not only trust their government, but their government has to be accountable to the people. And being able to create systems that says, okay, this is how much money we're using for this particular thing. This is how you can apply for these funds or use these funds. It's really important to be for utilities, for NGOs, as well as private companies to be vulnerable. And that's really hard for people to do, especially when you think about contractors who are accustomed to working in their bubble and not talking to people. We have to talk to one another, and we have to be able to say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing right now, but I'm looking forward to learning how. Or being able and open. I think that was kind of what the last question was about, saying, do contractors know, or not say, I'm sorry, do states know how to do these systems? Do they have the data? But the first place to start is to say, I don't have the data, and I don't know what I'm doing. A lot of cities, especially in a state like Louisiana that is old and it's very accustomed to its own systems and processes, a lot of people in leadership roles have a hard time doing that. So I just want to point that out, that you have to be vulnerable in order to be accountable and thus build trust. This process won't work without any of those things, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie and Jessica, for answering our question. I did want to kind of just plug that this partnership that we have right here, all the people that we have in this room, we're all currently working together on a lead service line inventory project that was funded by Google.org. And so this is in many ways something that's we're actively all working together on. And so it's really beautiful to be in this space together as Black women, honestly, working on cleaning up our communities and increasing clean water for all of us. So in our last 4 minutes, I'm going to plug, WEACT has a new website, Justice40rward.org. That's 40 and then ward. And on that website, you can find more information about our Justice Forward work, and that's work around the Justice 40 initiative. And as I close, I wanted to end with one last question around Justice 40. And with the Justice 40 initiative, it's an initiative that's set upon by administration. So it might end whenever the administration ends. But how can we use this moment to transform our work beyond just this administration? So how can we take Justice 40 as a current initiative and bring it forward for the rest of time? So that's my closing question to the group. Feel free to share it to everyone and unmute. Thank you.
Can start. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I just want to thank you again for this incredible panel. I think I say this often when in this group of folks, but I'm incredibly energized by what this movement is and what we're building for an equitable future that is clean and safe drinking water for folks that look like us and for folks that are continually disadvantaged. And I think what I would say is to continue to use your voice and power. And if you are someone who may be in a position of power over or influence with others who may not have the seat at the table that has historically been excluded, then use that power and influence to pull that person at the table, because those are the voices that are truly doing the work and making the change. And so that is what I would say as we look forward to potential shifts that may happen. The movement never stops. And I know this group will continue pushing that forward.
And may I add one small caveat? Hi, my name is Ua Vosper. I'm the Policy and Regulatory Manager at We Act for Environmental Justice, and I'm just assisting Nadia Hutchinson with the Justice40 event, tying in the importance of lead service line replacement. But the key that I wanted to just point out, because I work very closely with these beautiful folks on the panel, and as we Joy so gracefully put it, that it is a movement, but what's very important about the lead service line replacement project is it's going to create an inventory tool. And inventory is the first step in locating, identifying, and knowing where the lead service lines are and where they're heavily concentrated. So, you know, what's unique about it is that this is a project that is working with the water systems to ensure that the pipelines are identified and fully replaced, not partially. So it's important to see how everything interconnects, especially with Justice40. So that's just it, and don't want to be over time. So.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time and for your participation. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this webinar. And I hope that we can all stay connected beyond this call. For those that were participants, thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely share out some follow-up notes and ways to get further connected with the work that we're doing. And we hope that we all can decrease lead poisoning throughout the United States, especially in communities of color and communities of low income that have disproportionately been impacted by lead poisoning and so many other environmental injustices. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will close it out from here. Have a great day.